Hi everybody, this is your host for tonight's Moment of Truth, Meilin Obinata. Like a lot of you out there, I am curious about housing issues. Our guest tonight, California State Senator Aisha Wahab of District 10, is well-versed in all things housing as the chair of the Housing Committee in the State Senate. The broadcast area of KSQD includes Monterey and Santa Cruz counties, which are the site of bitter disputes about how to use land for residential, agricultural, urban, and transportation purposes. And generally speaking, land use is a battle royale here in California, as it might be in your listening area. So I hope you enjoy this conversation. Without further ado, here is our conversation with Aisha Wahab. So thank you so much for gracing us at K-Squid. I'm just wondering if people can take this time to get to know you. What attracted you to run for public office?
You know, I grew up in the foster care system, and you're exposed to a lot of communities, a lot of people, a lot of different circumstances, more so than I think people understand with foster care kids. And I eventually was adopted and so forth. But during the Great Recession, after being adopted and thinking, my life is on track or somewhat more on track, if you will, our family lost their business because retail is the first to tank when the economy slows down. And eventually we lost our home, and I was laid off of my own job. And we became a renter. And I will say that I experienced such deep fear, when you get the notice to leave your property and you have all the stuff that you've accumulated and, you don't know exactly where you're going to go. I've lived that. And I think that has really affected me long term. And I decided to run for office locally because I felt that the city council wasn't doing enough. I served as a board member of a couple of different nonprofits that focus on vulnerable communities, for example, domestic violence, civic engagement, and much more. And seeing the local city council not do enough on an issue where you have every single Tuesday night, dozens of people talking about how rent is high and much more, I said, I'm going to run. And I ran for office, and a lot of people said, you have a weird name, a weird background, a weird concept of what you're trying to do and focus on housing, and you're not with the big dogs in politics and so forth. And I ran as a, real grassroots candidate, and all the naysayers eventually saw that, if you focus on the real issues that affect people, you can win. And on council, I decided to focus wholeheartedly on what those issues were. We expanded, tenant protections and rent stabilization and down payment assistance program. You name it, we did it within the very first couple months to the first 2 years of my term. And so I just knew it was possible. It's just you have to have the will to do so. And there will be a lot of people in your ear that say, don't do it. Think about it again. And, I'm not here to keep the seat. I'm here to actually do what I said I was going to do. So it was just very interesting just to see public office and, from an intellectual standpoint. And when you read about public office and running about it is very different than actually doing it. And I think that, we're here to serve the public.
Thank you. And by Great Recession, just to clarify, which recession did you mean?
The 2008 financial crisis.
Okay. I wanted to know if there are some lessons that California maybe has yet to learn or learned from the '08 crisis and or the pandemic in terms of real estate and housing insecurity.
I'm deeply disappointed that a lot of policymakers haven't learned the lesson. And the reality is, I always say the big banks benefited twice, right? They were bailed out by the feds with a cash infusion because they were too big to fail. And they also kept the properties of millions of Americans and were able to resell it again for another profit, right? Mm-hmm. And we're seeing that in a different way today where you have private equity firms purchasing up all the real estate, single family homes, townhomes, condos, you name it. The mega corporate landlords are the only ones able to buy the multifamily properties. Let's just be very honest. Those are not built for, small mom and pop trying to own and manage. And regular people are being priced out in so many different ways. The renter is being priced out with all these junk fees and fake costs and things that were being charged for that we weren't charged for 10 years ago, right? Parking spots, monthly pet fee, a trash valet service, you name it, we're being charged for it on top of the rents. And you see these big corporate landlords get out of the Tenant Protections Act that basically capped rents in California at 10%. And they're trying to charge all of these other fees to get out of that. And so you're paying, instead of $2,000, a month, you're paying $2,500. So how are you going to save for a down payment? The single family homes and townhomes and condos, the first time buyer type homes, people can't even compete with if private equity firms are purchasing them all. We have eased and made it easy for developers to develop across the board, but we have not focused on how can it translate to the buyer or the renter, right? And it's big industry that I'm tackling half the time in Sacramento. And it's very, very disappointing to see policymakers constantly talk and use the talking points of big real estate as well as the corporate landlords. And, I had a assembly member just this past week or two tell me that they're a property rights person. Okay, that's nice, but I'm a human rights person. And I do believe that we have to focus on being able to serve the public first and foremost. And then we can talk about profits and corporations coming in and doing much more. But right now, our fastest homeless growing demographic is the senior population who are on fixed incomes and past their prime earning years. What are they going to do? Do we want them all on the street? No. So at a certain point, you have to tackle the greed and the corruption and the inequities of the market.
Maybe you should tell us how you really feel. No, I'm just kidding. I did hear that the California Apartment Association was pretty much out to get you, which is so I can understand, or I don't know if you want to say anything about their hostility, but if you're calling out their name as big real estate, I can understand how they might feel a little threatened.
Look, when I first entered the Senate, I was the only senator that was a renter. Okay? Mm-hmm. Most of my colleagues are definitely more senior than me and have properties and assets and much more. And I respect that. That is not a concern of mine at all. But I also have to explain to them that renting is not the way it was 20 years ago. It's not even the way it was 30 years ago, right? Let alone 10. And people are struggling. Housing is the number one issue up and down the state of California, regardless of what city you're in. Housing and homelessness, the top pulled issue. And for us to not do anything for millions of Californians that are renters because, hey, the ballot measures failed and, hey, corporate landlords can spend, 2-to-1, 3-to-1, 4-to-1, even more. Me introducing legislation to just make it even and say, hey, don't charge junk fees, right? For them to spend nearly $1 million to largely intimidate folks to vote their way in legislation being produced, I think is problematic for our legislative process and for our state as a whole. And, they spent millions of dollars doing mailers. I had multiple mailers come out against me in my own district in the month of May, multiple in just 1 month, right? Based on policy I'm pushing. That is largely inaccurate. And they do it to other members that live in more purple districts, right? And they do it to intimidate other members from being supportive. This is in so many different ways coercion, right? If not intimidation, if not, this is what we can do with the millions and millions and millions of dollars we have. And I will say that the corporate landlord market, and I'm talking about these massive corporations, I'm not talking about the small mom and pop that I know struggle to make ends meet, have it in their retirement, want to take care of their kids. That's fine. I'm talking about corporate landlords that have, dozens upon dozens of units. The reality is this, that they have outperformed the stock market for decades. they have an increase, even under rent stabilization and rent control. They are able to make a profit. Nobody's denying them of that. The only concern is it has to kind of be on par with what the community is dealing with, right? And it's not fair for a single mom or a family to have to move from city to city to city year after year after year because of the fact that they are trying to find the cheapest rent because their rent keeps going up. They have no housing stability. And if they can't afford rental housing, where are they going next? To the streets, right? So let alone competing to buy a home. Right? That's so hard for so many people, especially my generation that is focused on either starting their family, paying off student loans, or taking care of their aging parents. They're being choked out. And so at a certain point, I just want to make sure that policy is fair. Policy is really tackling the issues that our society is dealing with and not listen to the rhetoric, but here are the facts, right? That is the big concern I have.
So bringing the focus back to you, I'm just curious, what made you a match for District 10, and how's your service to that district influence what you do for the people of California?
Definitely. So I grew up in my district, right? I spent my entire life, for the most part, in my district. My district is incredibly diverse, but also has a very large Asian American population. You know, my parents were small business owners, homeowners, and now I'm a renter. I've gone to the local schools here, so I'm very much a daughter of the district. And I know my district really well. And my job is to listen to my constituents. My job is to understand their needs, understand, where can I help? And that's, very clear in what I'm trying to do. First and foremost, I've brought millions of dollars to my district for infrastructure improvements for our local communities and some of the projects that they've been trying to do. I've pushed legislation that has been very well balanced. For example, last year I had 16 bills signed by the governor. 11 of them, I believe, were bipartisan. I believe in fair, balanced policy. And I think that I work with my colleagues to ensure that my district is heard. My district doesn't have a very large city. We have the city of San Jose, but I only have 1/3 of it almost. But we compete in the Bay Area with San Francisco and Oakland, right? I also have to compete with LA, and I have to just make sure that our district is heard. The housing agenda does not represent the needs of my community, right? To make sure that we get fair funding in the state is incredibly important. Working with law enforcement, working with nonprofits, working with so many different advocacy groups to prioritize and elevate the voice of my district is incredibly important. And I think I do that job decently well.
How does that impact the rest of California? Because it's interesting to hear about that sense of competition, which I think we all are aware of, right? Because everybody has to watch out for their territory. As chair of the housing committee and appropriations and being the assistant majority leader, how do you bring that lens of serving your district as well as recognizing the needs of everybody else?
My district is very similar to the majority of California, first and foremost. I think that the reason why I reference the larger cities is because I think that a lot of the attention goes to the larger cities, right? San Francisco's in the news every single day, right? Everyone knows who the mayor of San Francisco is, even if they don't live in San Francisco. Same thing with LA. And I think that each of the cities obviously have their own complications. For example, LA is really dealing with the rebuild of since the wildfires, the cleanup, and much more. Oakland is dealing with their own issues. San Francisco is dealing with their own issues. Rural California has their own issues that, my district will be unfamiliar with, right? Agricultural issues that we generally just don't engage in that much, right? But my district is, very similar to other districts, right? We want to be able to live our lives, have good housing, good education, good job. Public safety is a priority and concern for many people. And, just building a stable, safe community for all residents. And so a lot of the policies I push, I know that it's going to affect the rest of California, right? And that's why I think that a lot of my bills have a bipartisan effort behind it, because it's not egregious, it's not outrageous, it's actually very well thought out. I try to be as meticulous as possible in what are we trying to achieve and how do we achieve that? And at the same time, I also want to push back against bad policy. And yes, we have a Democratic supermajority, and most people don't like to ruffle the feathers of their colleagues and much more. And for me, I just have to state, if I'm a no, I'm a no. And these are the reasons why I oppose this or I oppose that. Or I will support it, but I have concerns that need to be addressed here, here, and here. And I think that I've done that very well. I'm still considered roughly a freshman. And I think that it's very well known that I will make sure that my district is heard in the state Senate.
So, on one hand, definitely you are an advocate for tenants' rights. And also, it's clear that you want more housing to be built. So, could you describe for us, what is your vision of, say, residential housing and housing stability and what it means to take care of, say, renters and first-time homebuyers?
It's funny because my colleague out in San Francisco came to me on the Senate floor and said, Aisha, you're such a complicated person. At one moment, you want stronger and better protections for renters. And at the same time, you also want home ownership and much more. And I laughed and I said, you could have both, right? And here's the reality. There's a lot of special interest that plays in policy shaping and elections and much more. We know that. Every single person is not naive to this, right? And at the same time, I think that when we have policy discussions, I'm not one to just have the talking points of one group or another. It is truly how are we tackling these issues for all types of residents, right? So I mentioned that our senior population is the fastest growing homeless demographic. Here's their situation. They are largely on fixed incomes. They largely will have continued health concerns. They are past their prime earning years, and they need housing stability. That's not something that they should be super concerned with. And yet you also have people who are looking to purchase homes and be homeowners and just have that generational stability that home ownership affords them. And I will say 94% of Americans, regardless of socioeconomic background or political affiliation, believe home ownership is a part of the American dream. And I wholeheartedly believe that. And I want to make sure that we protect that. And that's why, even, for example, the realtors are supportive of the agenda that I have, which homeownership is incredibly important. One of the efforts I did this past year that got signed by the governor was to increase our renters tax credit for our lowest income renters, but also put money towards first-time home buyers in our down payment assistance programs, right? And I also believe in development, right? But I also think that local communities should have a say in what that development looks like, where they could potentially develop, and much more. And so that's incredibly important. Just serving on city council, I've seen that firsthand. There's potential, but there's some areas that can't develop as much or can't develop as deeply as some other cities that have more sprawl or more land, or some cities have to wait a little bit longer to be able to identify some more land to develop on. And when we develop, we have to develop dignified housing, right? I'm not interested in developing just to develop and say it's going to be all luxury rentals, which has been the case for a lot of the bills being pushed through the legislature. I'm not interested in just developing rental properties, right? Where it becomes an Airbnb or, it becomes a rental state. Home ownership is a priority for stability. 30-year mortgage versus year-over-year increases. Which one makes sense for a normal person? And at the same time, I want to make sure that, when we're talking about some of these lots that are gigantic lots of old school homes that were let's say 5,000 square foot lot or 10,000 square foot lot, yes, you could build probably higher density, but I also don't want to build what I'm going to consider 20 years from now to be a slum, right? We have to advocate for smart strategic planning. We need parking, right? Not everywhere has high density transit oriented hubs, right? Not everywhere has mass transit, public transit, or even people that are capable of going and utilizing transit. Some people are going to need to be driving their car. Some people are not going to be able to ride their bikes. Some people have different abilities, age considerations, health issues that they have to consider. And so I take all of this into consideration. And right now, the narrative in Sacramento largely is a silo of thoughts. The narrative has always been build, 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 and it's a supply and demand issue. It's not just a supply and demand issue. We also have to protect people, keep people housed longer, prevent displacement, reduce some of the barriers to build housing and much more. And I think that the policies I've supported, the policies I've produced, the policies I've helped work on, help in all of those categories. So housing is not a one size fits all. It's a multi-pronged effort from the renter, the tenant, the landlord, the home buyer, the developer, and much more. And I try to be very holistic in my approach to housing.
Thank you. And I just want to quickly ask you about a very exciting piece of legislation, SB 79, which has caused great excitement for people who are interested in transportation. What do you think will be the immediate impact should it come to pass? And what do you think people should do about it?
You know, the honest truth is SB 79, when it came to my committee, there was no affordability. It was zero affordability, zero home ownership, zero concerns for any types of protections. And, you know, people will allude to, oh, well, local control. There is no local control at the time because it touched single family zoning, commercial zoning, and light industrial zoning. Now, the bill has changed, and I think it will continue to change. Hopefully, we'll see that sometime in August as to what is the final end result of SB 79. And I have great respect for the author, but I fundamentally disagree on some aspects. Here's the reality. We have cut a lot of red tape for development over the past 10 plus years. And just last year, I believe in the entire state of California, we only developed about 112, 113,000 units. Okay. We are about 2.5 million units short of what we need. So if this is supposed to spur, with all the deregulation that's been taking place, spur more development, I don't believe that to be the case. I also want to say, what are we developing and who are we developing for? Right. And so where development is taking place is not in rural California. It is along the coast. And the type of housing being developed is rental units that will be rented out to more affluent individuals because, again, no affordable housing is tied to it. And so I believe in housing at all income levels, right? Not just the person that can pay the highest price. And we have seen this trend internationally, and I want to be very clear about that, because the larger publics have, in other countries, have actually started to oppose what is being done. And so I think that it's, you know, I'm going to give it a fair shake, and I always have. But when you don't have affordability and you don't have some of the protections that we have fought decades for to ensure that we are building housing for all people, I worry. Right. And so I will tell you that on the Senate side, 19 other members out of 40 members did not support the bill for one reason or another. And like I said, I think it's changing significantly, and we'll see what happens. And that's the whole process of the legislative cycle. But I'm going to see what happens there. But I also want to say SB 681, our bill that got signed through the budget and absorbed through the budget, actually does a significant amount more for all people. We really, really incentivize affordable housing development. We extended the Housing Crisis Act by removing all the sunsets, the Surplus Land Act, the down payment assistance, as I've said, coastal commission development for housing, and much more. And I think that that will spur a significant amount of development in areas that have been neglected for so many years.
So I want to focus on that topic of affordable housing. So thank you for bringing those up. And you just mentioned 681 and other things that would address affordability. In the ideal utopia, what could affordable housing look like in California? Because we hear about like the proper role of government or nonprofits or private developers or, some mixture of all those things, which the role of like tenant stabilization and building permanently affordable housing. What would be, and I don't know if you ever kind of have a dream vision of affordable housing, but what could that look like?
Definitely. I believe in housing at all income levels, right? And so I don't want to create it where only the low income people live here and this is how our communities are going to be. And we create this model that is largely not as inclusive as it could be. And seniors live here and, the wealthy elites live here. I think that's wrong for a community. And I think that creates a lot of other societal problems. So when I say housing at all income levels, I truly mean it. It has to be all income inclusive housing being developed. And ownership is a priority of mine. I believe that ownership allows and affords individuals to have far more housing stability. For example, you know what your monthly payment will be on a 30-year fixed mortgage. For 30 years, you're going to know it, right? In fact, when we purchase a car, we know what our payments are going to be for the next 5 years. But with housing, you literally either go month to month or every 12-month cycle, every year, basically. And I don't think that's necessarily fair. And it's also not conducive to people really being a part of the community, really putting in roots into the community, and much more. So for me, I think that I want to keep people housed longer. I want to produce all types of housing. I want to ensure that affordability is a priority. I want to prioritize home ownership over just rental units. And I want to really re-engage and refocus on what housing means to an everyday Californian.
So right now, and I mean, you kind of touched on that before, but what are the tools that we're currently using in California in terms of affordable housing?
The sad reality is that at the state legislature, for the last decade, as I mentioned earlier, that the thought process has been supply and demand. And that's an easy argument. A lot of people fall in line. But the reality is that at the rate that we're going, we're 2.5 million units behind, 1 million, it's supposed to be affordable housing. The cost of housing in itself, from development to ownership to rental, it's extremely expensive. I don't believe that the tariffs, as well as the interest rates, as well as the international crisis that we're seeing across the board on a wide variety of topics, is helping us with much development. I'm just going to be very frank about that. If you take a look at even the workforce that developed the housing, many of them have been laid off for several months now, right? And so to me, like I said, it's not just about development. We have to take a genuine look at all the other issues. And we have to have a balanced policies and investments to increase the overall housing supply of both rental and ownership, right? And what the legislature has been largely doing is they've been passing bills that cut a lot of the red tape, a lot of the previous policies to make it easier and cheaper to build housing that include, mostly a renter, type of development. And there has been policies to protect some tenants from displacement, but those all have sunsets, meaning it ends within a couple of years. And then there's also some investment in largely development. So at the top side of housing creation, right? So there's a lot of funding for light tech development, Project Home Key. And what the legislature, in my opinion, has been doing is focusing on the two ends of housing, the homeless issue and the development issue, but nothing in between. Right. And I think that there has to be more around that because we have to consider the silver tsunami, the significant amount of retirements that are going to take place and has already been taking place, what that means to our homeless population, what that means to our housing population, the folks my age that are millennials that are squeezed in between, that can't afford to buy and compete, and also the safeguards to prevent what we have been seeing with the private equity firms, what we've been seeing with Zillow, what we've been seeing with BlackRock. There's so many different things that we don't have safeguards to protect our housing stock right now, let alone develop more and provide more protections.
What do you think we should be doing about the silver tsunami, as you call it?
You know, our senior community is one of our most valuable communities and also one of our most vulnerable communities. They are often largely targeted by a lot of questionable characters with a wide variety of schemes. We see it online, we see it through social media, we see it through fraudulent activity on their credit score, credit cards, and much more. And I think that we have to kind of realize that, hey, they may want to move into a smaller unit. What do we do and how do we accommodate that? They want to keep their property tax value. They want to be able to support their kids and grandkids. They want to make sure that their kids and grandkids don't move out of state. So what are we doing? How are we protecting them? And I think that there's a lot that we can do, but it's a balancing act of how we manage a property, what type of incentives do we give, how fast can we move on this, and then the questionable folks that come out that are stakeholders that will push back on anything and everything we're doing, right? And also making sure that our properties aren't absorbed by all of these private equity firms that we have been seeing across the board, whether it's the corporate landlord market, small mom and pop landlord market, or even just the single family onesie twosie home purchasement.
When you were saying earlier about investing in affordable housing, I have a friend who said, oh, when it's something that people like, they call it an investment. And when, when it's something they don't like, they call it something else, like, oh, we're subsidizing. So what would you do with the budgets to make sure that we are able to invest in helping seniors, for example, with their housing?
Yeah. So, for example, SB 681, I mentioned earlier that we increased the renter's tax credit, which was not increased for literally decades. Okay. So it doesn't matter if you're a joint or individual filer. We are making sure that people get $500 with dependents and $250 without dependents, and making sure that we're prioritizing those on our lower income. Largely our seniors who are on fixed incomes like Social Security and disability will benefit from this, right? And they are struggling to pay for their groceries, keeping the lights on, let alone housing. And we also invested $300 million for the Dream for All program, which is the helps first-time home buyers. Right. So it could potentially help a person buying a first time home, whether that's a townhome, a condo, or a single family home. It does not matter. Right. We also invested $500 million in low income housing tax credits that largely help develop affordable housing projects across the state. And for our homeless population, the Homeless Housing Assistance and Prevention Program, we invested $500 million, which historically was higher. This year, with a bad budget year, it's at $500 million that helps local communities actually address the homeless issue with some accountability. And then for our big multifamily housing program that funds construction for deeply affordable housing statewide, we put in $120 million, right? So like I said, there's multiple levels to housing, multiple different concerns about housing, from protecting renters and making sure that they have money and, really trying to protect them from junk fees and much more. And it doesn't matter if you're a senior or a single mom or a student, these programs help in multiple different ways, let alone the folks that are actually doing the business of creating homes, the developer, and much more, as well as helping local cities tackle their homeless problem that many people have a concern with across the state, making sure that they're housed, they have shelters, and much more, and getting them off the street. So like I said, there's plenty of levels here, including the home owner and the home buyer.
So what should community members do to make sure affordable housing is happening in their communities? Just in terms of the nuts and bolts of like homework you would assign us as we're listening to you. What can we do to help solve this issue?
Don't listen to the narratives, right? The narratives are very special interest driven. There are groups that want to categorize people as yes in my backyard or no in my backyard, and slapping labels and putting people in boxes is not right, first and foremost. And number two, this issue is not a one size fits all. It does not allow for true thinking. Every single community is very different. So first, take a look at your local community. Your local community matters because the local city councils actually do a lot of land use policy. And you'll see a lot of trends within the state that want to cut what a local city can do and say, oh, we're going to do this because our policy is better and we know better than the local communities. That's not accurate. Right? There are local communities that want to build a senior center. There are local communities that want to create low-income housing or home ownership opportunities and much more, and just need resources, which is what we've done. And they need technical assistance, right? And we're trying to, in one of my bills, I'm trying to expand what a pro-housing designation is for a local city to be able to compete, not just for money, but technical assistance, grants, and much more if they are trying to provide shelters, if they're trying to provide more housing opportunities. And housing means more than just massive development, right? It means also creating a stable environment and keeping people housed longer. I always recommend for people to take a look at their city council meetings, see if their local city not only has what type of development do they build, how much development, if they're actually hitting their metrics, which the state has access, and it's very transparent. What type of housing are they developing? Are they developing only luxury housing? Are they developing only rental units? Are they developing affordable housing? Do they have protections for renters? Do they have rent stabilization? Do they have a just cause eviction? And you can really make an impact on your local city council. But housing, again, there are so many special interest groups that don't want any type of protections, don't want any type of true home ownership. What they want is to produce these smaller units that they can just mass produce. And we do need some of it, don't get me wrong. But we also need to make sure that housing is dignified for folks, that people can stay there longer, that people can raise families in potentially, that is ADA compliant and much more. And really for everyone, not just one group. So you really have to take a look at the big picture of what is everything that a local city is providing, let alone a local county or state.
And Senator Wahab, so I know that, thank you so much for answering all these questions about housing, and more housing questions. Yeah. But you actually work on, of course, like anyone else, a broad range of issues. So I've seen some things, of course, that you've worked on, but are there other topics that you want to uplift in light of, say, current events, or just that you think we should just be more aware of?
Yeah, so I'm chair of housing this year, and so I've taken pretty much any position I have very seriously. And I think because I don't just drink the Kool-Aid of what's being said, I think it really bothers people. But housing is the number one issue for me. I think it's incredibly important. I think it's important for pretty much every Californian based on polling too. But I also want to highlight some of the work I do outside of this particular topic. I focus a lot on consumers. So, for example, I have SB 332, which is Investor-Owned Utilities Accountability Act. And there were core components that were put into another bill that I'm a joint author of with the chair of energy that really says that ratepayers, which is, the people that pay PG&E and Edison and, all of those utility companies, that we don't and we shouldn't have to pay up for wildfires that negligence causes, or the fact that they have not invested in their infrastructure and much more. So it promotes affordability, it protects ratepayers, it increases accountability and transparency from the investor-owned utilities, and sees, are there other options that may work better, right? And I know that there are plenty of these investor-owned utilities that are coming hard at me on this topic, but here's the reality. There is a monopoly when we are talking about investor-owned utilities, and specifically PG&E, when they own 70% of the infrastructure. The CPUC, the Public Utilities Commission, has not denied a rate increase for over 20 years, right? And just this past year, PG&E requested a rate increase just to pay their shareholders when in the last 2 years they made record profits in the billions, right? So I want a little bit more accountability there. And, they have to invest in the state too. It's not just us approving it and it being on the backs of regular people. When homeowners are telling me that they spend nearly $700 a month on their monthly PG&E bill, right? How is that possible when they basically have to choose between buying groceries on a monthly basis, paying a car payment, or keeping the lights on? So that's a big bill that we have been pushing and we've been getting hit hard on. And I feel like I get hit hard on a lot of the bills I carry. But another one is that we want Fair Online Practice and Pricing Act. That's SB 259. So what we've come to learn, and I represent Silicon Valley, is that if you have an Android, you are charged less than a person who has an iPhone. If you have the latest and greatest cell phone, you are charged more. So, for example, if you're trying to call a ride for yourself and your battery is at 10% and it turns red, there will be an uptick in the price that you are not even aware of. It's price gouging in so many ways. And we are trying to limit businesses from using specified data of a consumer's device when determining a price. This also is, for example, if we are trying to rent a hotel in New York City and doing it from rural California, we're charged less than if we were to do it from the Bay Area or LA or a more affluent area. And they can tell by the geotagging of where your cellular data is being pinged. So there's a lot of abuses happening that people are not even aware of. And it's costing people daily money over and over and over and over again without them even realizing it. So I try really hard to protect the average person and just be reasonable and tackle some of the issues that, really affects them on a daily basis, whether it's popular or not.
Just to go back to what you're saying about the utilities. So in the broadcast area of the Santa Cruz and Monterey counties, of course, that includes the area affected by the CZU fires. So people, I don't think there's no love lost between, I'm sure, a huge part of the population and PG&E. But that was SB 332?
Yes.
Right? Is there anything that people could do to help you? There's no end to the loss of love between.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I will share a story. It's fascinating. So I'm in a PG&E zone, right? And when I'm in Sacramento, I'm in a Sacramento Municipal Utilities District. And the cost is so significantly different. It's shocking, right? And we had a council member in Oakland who wanted to do a resolution in support of the bill. PG&E is headquartered in Oakland. And what I heard from the council member was that they were threatening to leave Oakland. They sold off their San Francisco area and they said, basically, we are a huge employer. You have to do this, you have to do that. And I told her, like, look, I understand. I'm not going to, I didn't even realize you were doing this. And she goes, no, I want to continue doing this. I'm so upset that they would even threaten me, and so forth. And I think all local city councils and, party groups, so whether you're a Democrat or Republican, the larger party groups that are there, I think that they can get involved. The counties can get involved and much more. I will share this past week. I presented this in the Assembly Energy Committee, and it got a little watered down, the bill, which we expected in Assembly Energy. And you had an individual who stated their concerns and said, but I will still support the bill. And another individual who worked for one of the utility companies for many years. And she said that to say that, that profits are a priority and safety is not, I can't support this and so forth. And I ended up reading an LA Times article that clearly just highlights from these utility companies that people have died working for them. People have died because of their infrastructure and their lack of investment. And I know that the fires that we had in LA that we saw was the worst fires in California's history, let alone it was in a winter month. But I
Mm-hmm.
get it, from the time it happened to 6 months later, 7 months later that we're in, maybe the feelings are still dull for you, but lives were lost and property was
Mm-hmm.
lost,
Mm-hmm.
right? And asking them and holding them accountable is my job. And I hope that everyone else understands that. And so I doubled down just because I was frustrated with the fact that everyone talks about how they care,
Mm-hmm.
but they don't. And that's my big battle in the legislature. It's very disappointing. And here's the reality of it, too, is that these corporations are making billions upon billions of dollars. They have never heard the words no. I have met personally with PG&E on my bill and saying, okay, where can we work together on, or what are you guys more supportive of? And they took weeks and weeks and weeks to get back to me. They finally met with me again, and they said that, oh, this is a terrible bill. This is the nuclear option. We're going to oppose it. And I said, so out of all the points that my bill touches, you're telling me you can't figure out one issue that you guys would be in agreement with? And they said no. And I was like, okay, well, thank you for your time. I try to work with everybody, but sometimes you just can't get what you need because they've never lost. They're spending millions and millions of dollars on commercials saying how great they are. But here's the fact. PG&E has 100,000 miles of lines that they know that they have to underground. And they have only identified 10,000 miles of critical lines, as they call it, to underground. And in the last 3 years, each year, they've only undergrounded 100, 200 to 300, 300 to 400 lines. So it would take us more than a decade to underground the 10,000 critical lines they've identified. That's a joke. You know it, I know it, everybody knows this. And they're going to say that they've spent money and is doing this and it's hard. You guys are making billions of dollars worth of profit. So I'm genuinely one of those people that tired of the excuses. Let's get some things done. Like California should be a safe and secure area when we're talking about our utilities and infrastructure. The fact that in the Bay Area it will rain for a day or two, not even that hard, we lose power, thousands of homes. There's
Okay.
no reason for California infrastructure to be that poor.
Where's the tiny violin, Senator Wahab? Tiny violins. But also, SB 259, you were talking about how pricing can take into account your, I guess, geotagging. And
Yes.
I would say, do you want us to like march on Cupertino or Mountain View, and like what can we do about that?
Honestly, I think that people need to talk about the bills and email their state elected officials. So whether that's your assembly member or senator, email both. Making sure that people post about it and are a little bit more transparent, like, hey, I support this because it does this. The problem is that we have thousands of bills that go through the process and in a single year, and people are sometimes unaware of it. And, for example, you're asking me, what are some bills that you like that you're carrying that, I can talk about. The reality is several of the bills I can say, if not all of my bills, I think are incredibly important. Will they all live? Highly doubt it. Will our colleagues that literally represent LA that got hit with wildfires, the fact that they don't support accountability measures is alarming. And that has to be called out as well.
Well, so thank you for everything you've shared so far. Do you have like a favorite aspect of serving in the California Senate? Because I'm just thinking, wow, I wonder if are you like very popular among your peers? Are they terrified if you call them? Like what's their reaction to you? It's like, oh, she's gonna say no, or she's gonna hold her ground, or she's gonna get what she wants. But what's your favorite part of what you do every day?
I always joke with friends about this. I say Sacramento is a very lonely place when you are just trying to do your job and do what really impacts 40 million Californians. And I think that many people go up there and get lost, right? And I've always been a very independent thinker. And I'm very reasonable. Like I said, I think that Republicans also believe in some of the things. And some of them will even say, like, you know, I'm surprised I agree with this or that. And the reality is, good policy is very thoughtful and inclusive of all concepts and ideas and safeguards and concerns and much more. And I try really hard to develop those types of policies. At the same time, I work well with all my colleagues, but I will also tell them where I draw the line. And I'm very transparent and very honest. Many of them actually appreciate that because sometimes you can't get a straight answer, right? People do the sideways talk or talk from both ends of their mouth, and that's not something that I find productive for me, and I think it's a waste of time personally. But and then sometimes I will tell you, many times I am deeply disappointed, deeply disappointed, frustrated, and much more. My team is too. I have a very small and mighty team that work really hard to do what's right. They care about the policy, and sometimes we see stories or rhetoric or is completely false. Even people utilizing data, they'll use data from 15 years ago to try to prove a point. And there is no logic and there are no real facts in policymaking up there. It's sometimes just, again, rhetoric and narratives and clicks and things like that. And we try to push back against it. And I think because we are very transparent, it's actually very beneficial to us. But, it's a mixed bag. But my favorite part, honest, is when people reach out to us because they are struggling with some issue, either locally or with the State Department, or sharing their story with us, and we can help in some way, right? Whether somebody is struggling to get their unemployment check, whether somebody is struggling to find some type of support in their local city. We had a number of seniors reach out to us in Santa Clara. And it was a new development, and they wanted to show us how terrible the conditions are. And I went, and I take everything with a grain of salt. And I visited the property, and I was shocked. I called the city manager right then and there. And he was like, oh, well, we've sent building officials there and so forth. And what ends up happening is that I said, I wouldn't call you if it wasn't something that I think is very concerning. Mm-hmm. He comes with the city attorney. And immediately he said he was disappointed,
Wow.
Right? And we're trying to solve the problem. And these are seniors. Mm-hmm. And some of them are 80-year-old folks that are monolingual in their native tongue. And others were teachers and all retired folks. And the city and the state supported that development significantly. It's a new development, 2020. There should be no reason why people are being treated this way, including their grill, the community grill, being chained and them having to pay $120 each time they want to grill. So if you love barbecue and you're cooking it every weekend, the fact that seniors are paying $120 just to use the community grill, those are concerns. Let alone the fact that they had a small fire last year and there are people living in an entire floor. Their second floor had only studs and plywood open, when you ring the doorbell and the wires and things like that, you could see all of it, no insulation, no sheetrock up, nothing. And it's already been a year. What are we doing here? So helping those folks, they're happy the moment that they see somebody taking their issue seriously and actually visiting them and elevating the issue and trying to problem solve immediately. So I saw it on Friday. By Monday, they had a full-on meeting with both the landlord, the property owner, property managers, and tenants to resolve the issue. And so we're getting updates about that. And again, those are moments that I'm very happy to do my job.
Well, thank you so much, Senator Wahab. I was just going to ask you for fun. What do you actually like to do in your free time, of which I'm sure you have so much, but do you have any hobbies that you'd be willing to share about?
Yeah, I actually, we have a shoreline where I live. It's in Hayward. I love to walk my shoreline, love to hang out with just friends and have like dinner. Summer months, I love a gelato, to be honest with you, all bad habits. But I'm hoping to have one later today with some friends and watch movies, like just normal community type of feel good, feed the soul type of vibes.
Okay, since you said gelato, what flavor?
So I'm very boring. Vanilla bean.
Really? Okay. Not hazelnut, not chocolate. Okay.
Vanilla bean or strawberry.
Okay. Okay. Great. Well, if there's anything I haven't asked you yet that is just on your mind and you want to throw out there, please feel free.
I have one bill that I am pushing for, and I hope it goes well. We had a bunch of community groups that were deeply affected by this. We are trying to remove the final exemption of a spousal rape law to ensure that rape is rape. And right now, the current law says that if your spouse is disabled, the spousal rape law may not apply. And that is deeply concerning to us, and the fact that it's still there when dozens upon dozens of other states, including red states, have already removed that, and California is still behind the times.
And what number is that?
258.
All right. That is 258. Well, thank you so much, Senator Wahab. You've been so generous with your time. I'm just so grateful you joined us at KOSQD. And if people want to follow you, I think you have multiple social media.
Yeah, Instagram, Facebook, however anyone wants to get in touch, even if they want to reach out to our office, we're more than happy to talk to people.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Senator Wahab, for joining us and illuminating us on multiple issues affecting our great state of California.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for listening to Moment of Truth. I'd like to thank Moment of Truth founder and host Amy Chen Mills, Yankun Yasu for production engineering, Todd Zimmerman for the beautiful intro music, and Joy Schendel-Decker as well. As always, much appreciation to Howard Feldstein and all the staff and volunteers of KSQD for supporting this show. And remember, if you don't use your democracy, you lose your democracy.